Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Your Life, Your Story, Rise Up. I'm your host, Jill O'Boyle, and I am so excited today. I am joined with a guest. He is Jim Young, a author, a speaker, and the founder of The Centered Coach, and he helps men move from burnout to expansive success. So I'm really excited to welcome this guest on the show today. You all know that I love to talk about helping women rise up in their lives and help really every individual rise up in all areas of their lives to step into their authenticity, step into their purpose. And then I coach women, of course, on burnout as well. So when I landed on Jim, I found him on LinkedIn and I thought, oh my gosh, he is a man of my heart. He's after the men that are facing burnout. And so Jim, welcome so much to the show. I'm so glad you are here with me.
Jill, thanks for having me on the show. I love that we have these two different angles that we tend to approach from, because I think that we all need to be working together if we're going to rise up.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive in. I know you have a story. That's the whole purpose of the podcast, right? Your life, your story is really I created this podcast really as a space for let people come and share their stories. My passion is that I think our world is all about building relationships. And how we do that is through meaningful conversation and shared experiences. And so I love to create this space where people can come on and share their story. And because you just never know who's listening on the other side that says, wow, I relate to Jim. I need to find out more about Jim and how can I get in touch, with him to help me on this journey. And also a place where you just don't feel so alone. I know in my journey, I felt very alone at times in my life. And I thought, if I could have landed on a podcast like this, I think that would have helped. So let's just kind of dive in, tell the listeners a little bit about you. And I believe all of us have an awesome and unique talent and gift. So what makes you, Jim, awesome as well?
I'm going to pick up a couple of words that you just used, relationships being the first one. And in my experience growing up, I'm about 53 years old, just about to turn that. So I was raised in the 70s and 80s in New England and in the US here. And being a sensitive boy who wanted to be in relationships, wanted to get to know people, who wanted the social bonds of my life to be kind of primary, it didn't really fit into the culture I was being raised in. There was a lot more about showing how tough I was or accomplishing things. And my experience of that was that I didn't really fit. And so I needed to start to hide parts of myself. And my gifts today have come back. I've kind of taken away all of the the clutter that I hid them under, and said, you know what, like the thing that makes me most helpful to the world, where I can be best used, is by creating relationships, by being in touch with how I feel about the world, being able to share that out loud with people. I still am pretty damn tough and get a lot done. Like I have them, those traditional masculine qualities. I had to develop those, even though they didn't feel as natural to me. But now I get to be that full part of myself too. That's really, just interested in connecting with people and seeing what we can create together. More of a social being social and emotional being than I ever was, in my growing up years.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's it's so powerful, and it's actually lands like honestly right on a post that I wrote and put out this morning on LinkedIn, was this feeling of muting our voice. And I think society will kind of teach us at a young age that very quickly. And I found myself, I love to talk. Like as a child, I love to talk through all the strength finders and the tests and the gifts. Like communication is my number one skill. But isn't that so funny that that might be my number one gift and strength and talent? But through my years, this belief got in my head that, the world is a really kind of scary place and it's pretty judgmental.
Yeah.
And the way to not be judged or criticized or looked at differently is to fit in, per se.
Mhm.
And so I had found myself just slowly, ever so slightly, that fun, energetic, girl that loved to talk was just like, in this situation or this place or this organization, I'm going to just slowly mute my voice. And so that's been a big aha moment, honestly, as I've been growing and learning, that I look back on my life and I said, wow, that was part of what kind of led me into my burnout story.
Mm.
Because
Mhm.
there's so much freedom when you can show up as your authentic self. There's so much freedom when you can unmute your voice. God created us all differently, and that's an absolute gift. But I love that you shared that you kind of felt the same way, of just that you kind of slowly started wanting to fit in and quiet that voice, and now you're on a mission to build those relationships and connections.
What and to color that in a little bit more, what I hear in your story is something that I commonly hear, that women feel like they have to make themselves smaller. They have
Yeah.
to shrink in order to fit in. And
Hmm.
that my experience was sort of the opposite of, I felt like I had to be bigger, I had to be bolder, I had to be achieving and accomplishing more. I had to be this strong, successful, no struggles, no worries kind of person, when I'm somebody, if you look at a disc assessment, for an example, I'm an S. I like to sit
Hmm.
back and listen and absorb and take things in, instead of jump up and be the one in charge and
Yeah.
lead the discussion. I like to be more collaborative. And I didn't feel that's who I was supposed to be. So there's, obviously
Right.
there's a lot of different experiences, but I think there's some gender norms that we start to fall into. And I had to be bigger when I didn't want to be. You had to be
Be.
smaller when you didn't want to be.
Yeah. I love that. So let's talk about that, as the person who felt like you needed to be that achiever,
Mhm.
accomplished. So I know your background. Let's talk a little bit about your background. Prior to coaching, you were in the corporate world.
Mhm.
Where in your story is there a moment that you can reflect back for the listeners, that either you felt burnout coming on, or you just all of a sudden were in it?
Hmm.
Is there a moment that you can think of, or at what point did you realize I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, I wish it had been that I had a story of I could feel it coming on. I
Don't
think
we all?
oftentimes, yeah, for the most part, it hits us after we're already in it, and that was definitely my story. The the seminal moment for me was lying face down on the carpet in my living room, just completely depleted, sobbing, like overwhelmed beyond belief. I couldn't even have imagined being in a state like that. And that was when I recognized, like, oh, I've been pushing so hard for so long. I had recently been divorced. I had three young kids that I was trying to learn how to single parent. I was ascending the ranks of my organization towards my dream job, managing 12 people, 60 clients, helping architect a company rebuild,
Yeah.
all sorts of things that I was just saying, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. I can take that on too. And then I had a work crisis, and my grandmother, who was a primary caregiver for me when I was growing up, reached end of life and was,
Mm.
nearing her death. And it just all came came apart at the same time. And I was like, oh no, like, where am I? How do I get out of this?
Yeah. So in those moments, um, what did you do? I mean, how did you cope? How did that lead you to maybe where you're at today? Because I know you and I both know it's a journey.
Mhm.
Um, so what were some things that helped you get through it? And then how did that lead to I love to talk about purpose, so we'll get into that, but what you're
Yeah.
doing now.
After trying to gut through that for a long time and reaching that collapse point, I made a really difficult decision and I went to my CEO and I said, I need to step away. And I didn't call it a mental health break, but that's
Mm-hmm.
what it was.
Yeah.
And I took a month away. I didn't do anything really. I mean, I tried to rest and recover and I had some conversations with mentors and just tried to recharge my batteries so I could go back into the fray. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
Um, and I pushed just as hard for about the next year before realizing, oh, I'm headed towards something even worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left that job. I had reached the pinnacle job of my career, the one that I'd been striving for
Yeah.
decades. And I said, this isn't it. Damn, how could that be? Like I wanted this to work and I had to say, okay, I'm going to step away from it. And
Yeah.
there's a transition job that I took to make sure that I could keep paying my bills and take care of my family. But then eventually I said, it's time for me to
Mm-hmm.
finally start doing work that means something to me instead of just a paycheck.
Yeah.
I'd been trying to fit my life around my work for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I was compromising my own values. So I said, it's time to change. And in 2018, I walked into my boss's office with a resignation letter and no plan. I said, I'm just going to leave and figure it out from here.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. And a couple things came up for me when you were sharing that was there was almost a little bit of a slight wake up call, right? Where you
Mm-hmm.
knew you needed this break. You needed a break for multiple reasons. Not only was it the job and a lot of the you mentioned you just kept continuing to take on more and more, right? To get
Mm-hmm.
this, I would assume, to reach some point of level of success that you had in your mind,
Yeah.
which could have stemmed from that childhood that we were just talking about, where you didn't want
Oh,
to be like that, but you
100%.
felt like you needed to achieve more.
Yeah. I could be the boss, then
Yeah,
I'd be seen as worthy.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so between that of the achieving side and then also the personal things that were going on, it was a
Mm-hmm.
wake up call that says, whoa, I just need a break.
Yeah.
I just need a break. That's really what's going on. And I think a lot of people assume that, right? And sometimes people, I always there's a difference between, self-care, and you can go and take a leave of absence, and you should, you absolutely should. Um, but it was almost like in this situation, that was kind of a little bit of a wake up call to say, I need this break, but yet still internally that achieving was still going on. Well, okay, now that I've gotten my break, let me get back at it. Right. And that
Totally.
lasted for another maybe year.
Yeah, a couple of years with it, including the transition job that I took after. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Is that I took this break so that I could just get back and do it again. I didn't change. I just decompressed. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
alter my mindset and say, okay, this wasn't healthy. I didn't have the
Mm-hmm.
awareness then, or maybe I did, and I was in denial of like, I
Yeah.
have to be able to do this because it's what I'm supposed to be able to do. I should be able to take all of this on.
Mm-hmm.
And that reset just gave me what I needed. It didn't.
It didn't.
I
That's
needed
right.
to change in a different way.
Yeah. So what was the feeling like when you finally realized, okay, like I need to unsubscribe from this job,
Yeah.
unsubscribe from this hustle lifestyle, and you went in, you gave the resignation letter. Talk about that, because I think, I don't want to assume, but from a man's perspective of being that feeling that you have to be in achievement, what was some of the emotions that went on through that, and had you done some pre-work to get you to actually reach that point to say, I'm okay with this?
Yeah. I had definitely done some pre work. I'd been doing work on my mental health, working with a therapist, doing some other work in some groups, and just really trying to get back to my core self. What did I truly value in life? What were the principles I wanted to live by? It became
Yeah.
really clear in that work that it was dissonant with the career choices that I was making, the way I was spending my time, what I was prioritizing.
Hmm.
And when I did pull the ripcord, there was echoes of phrases like uh, winners don't quit and quitters don't win in my head, of like, you just quit this thing that you're supposed to win at.
Right.
And I had to battle some shame around that, and I had to really just keep coming back to, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? What's the thing that matters the most?
Yes.
And eventually, a lot of that was being present for my kids. And
Hmm.
some of it was also just a realization of, I'm not going to enjoy my life, and it might not last very long. Like, I'm doing damage to myself physically
Yeah.
and mentally. And eventually it shifted to seeing that, oh, there is something else there for me. In fact, it almost shifted way faster than I imagined. 4 days after I handed in that resignation letter, I ran into a friend of mine, and I was telling her the story of my week. And I said, I have no idea what I'm going to do next. I just left my career. I was kind of second guessing. And she said, well, what did you love doing in
Hmm.
that career? What are the parts that you want to salvage? And I was like, oh, well, of course. I loved, as a leader and as a manager for decades, helping people grow and helping teams come together and do things
Hmm.
they never could have imagined doing together. I said almost those exact words to her, and she said, well, I work as a coach, and that's what I do full time. And I was like, what? You could do that
This is a
as your
job.
career? Where do I sign up?
Oh my goodness. Isn't that funny? It's just takes somebody's outside perspective sometimes on
Totally.
our life, because we get into this mold and pattern of what we should, right?
Mm-hmm.
I discovered my life coach, and that was one thing she said to me that was profound, is she's like, you're just gonna just should your life away, Jill. I mean, if you just keep saying I should do this, I should do that. And I'm like, isn't that so true that so many of us do that? And then we get wrapped up, at least for me, my identity got wrapped up in, I'm a project manager. That's who
Mm-hmm.
I am. I deliver amazing projects and events for people. And so outside of that, I think a lot of people get stuck there where they have done something for so long that they're like, I have no idea what else I would do. And the
Yeah.
question that your friend asked you is a powerful one. It's like, well, what do you enjoy doing? What do you love? What comes natural to you? Um, and now I'm sure, as being a coach, I'm sure you're finding that you absolutely love it, right? It's in your natural wheelhouse.
I couldn't have imagined having a career that I get excited about. Literally every
Yeah.
engagement, every project that I do, I'm excited because I'm in my zone.
Yeah.
And something you said reminded me of a scaffolding moment for me around making that unsubscribe move, as you described it, which I love. 3 months before I resigned, I went to a workshop in Boston with this guy, Ari Weinswig. He's the co-founder of Zingerman's, a very popular food empire in the Midwest. And we did a visioning exercise in that workshop, which I had known about visioning, and
Hmm.
I think I'd practiced it once in a corporate event that I was at. But I wrote in this exercise at this workshop about this future that I wanted to create. And he just said, go wild, just don't filter, don't edit, just let your brain go and
Yeah.
just write. And I wrote that I wanted to, in my future career, and this is 3 months before I I was going to create it, that I wanted to help people find the calm centered place from which they did their best at
Mm.
work and life. That's a quote from that writing. And this is the same mentor, this guy Ari, who taught me that don't let the world should all over you. And
Yes.
that shoulding was holding me back from saying, like, I could completely re-envision how I serve the world, and that could be
Hmm.
my career. And
Yeah.
giving yourself that freedom, like for me, that was just like a lightning bolt moment.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. One of the things that you said earlier too was that you really started looking at when you went in with that resignation, you felt this calming over it, and you realized where you were spending your time,
Mhm.
and what priorities mattered the most. And I think that's a powerful exercise. It's one that I use with my clients all the time, is really what matters most in your life. And um, throughout your story, I think the listeners can realize that burnout is not always just the work stuff, right? It's not the
Mhm.
coworkers, the boss, the tasks, the never ending, client demands. There's a lot of other layers that are leading, that are going on behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
That can then make those work things feel like it's just all the work.
Mhm.
But I know in my own self-discovery work, and I'm sure yours, you found there's a lot of other layers that were going on to lead you there. So I want to talk about that a little bit, especially from a man's perspective who's
Yeah.
dealing with burnout and they're thinking maybe it's just all about my job right now. You wrote a book called The Expansive Intimacy. And let me look, I don't want to mess that up, but I think you said something about how tough guys defeat burnout.
Yeah.
Um, can you share a little bit about the book? Um, what inspired you to write that? And is there a correlation? Where I was going with that was, what is there this correlation with men regarding that burnout of just the work and then the personal side?
Mhm.
I'm taking a guess. I just feel like men have a little bit more harder time opening up to admit that they're burnout. There's some vulnerability there. So I'm just
Mhm.
curious, because I talk a lot about women being burnout, but I really want to talk about your book and then what's your take on that?
Yeah, I'd love to first dip into that question around personal life as a burnout
Yeah,
factor versus work, because I think we think of burnout as a workplace condition. The World Health Organization defines it as such, and that's one of
that
my disagreements with that definition, is that it's just about the workplace. It's not.
it's not.
Full
Yeah,
stop.
I agree.
For me, where I've recognized that my personal life was entangled in my burnout experience comes back to these beliefs that I'm not supposed to be a social, emotional, relationship focused being. I'm supposed to do, achieve, provide, succeed. And
Mm,
totally unconsciously, I carried that mentality into all aspects of my life, including my marriage, where my when I look back on it, I almost treated my marriage like a job. Like there were certain things I needed to do, there were things that needed fixing from time to time, and I didn't allow myself to really be open and relate on an honest level of what I
mm-hmm.
was feeling and what I wanted. And I was really shut down in that part of my life, probably other parts as well.
Yeah.
And as soon as my first child arrived, I knew my life changed, as most parents I think
Mm,
do. And I was thrilled. And I knew that being a dad was going to be one of the best experiences of my life. That, 20 years later, that's 100% true.
yeah.
And in this role I had assigned to myself in my personal life that had a lot to do with my work life of providing for my family,
Mm-hmm.
it meant that I was cutting off largely this part of my life that I knew I wanted to invest heavily in. I wasn't a present dad as much as I wanted to be. I might have been there sometimes when I wanted to be, but not fully there because I was thinking about work or thinking about stresses that I wasn't managing. And there were certainly times when I was just at work instead of being there for an event or whatever was going on, a kid, homesick or something like that.
Yeah.
So that aspect, I think, is common for men. I know there are women who deal with this as well. But I think for men, the expectation of you're the breadwinner and you're going to be off working, it's going to be a primary focus. It takes away from these other parts of us that we might really, really deeply want to invest in.
Yeah. I relate to that so much. And I would agree that I would think many men feel the same way, where they feel a label of having to be a provider.
Yeah.
And because of that, then they need to achieve, they need to be the one that's working, they need to be the one bringing in. And because of that, sometimes I would assume that takes precedent of, well, I'm doing all the work, I'm providing, so you must raise the children. And there's definitely a
Mhm.
disconnect there. So did some of that lead to, where does the intimacy part come in?
Sure. So the rules that men live by in Western culture are not written down anywhere, but we all know them. You're
Mhm.
supposed to be strong, successful. You don't show emotions, especially to another guy. You suffer in silence. You man up, essentially, right? And that set of rules, if we break them, we're going to start to pay consequences. It starts early. It starts on the playground at recess if you cry because you fell down and
Yeah.
hurt yourself. It's in the middle school locker room. It's in the high school hallways. It's in the professional world as well. That if we don't live up to the standard of what a man is, that's shameful because we're weak. So we have to continue to strive and work and show that we're worthy to be the strong provider, to really boil it
Yeah.
down. And that recipe looks a lot like what my experience was, where you just keep going no matter what, even after you've hit the wall. And so there's a part of the book that I knew I was going to write about burnout and get to in a second, expansive intimacy, which was my revelation that that's how I got myself out of burnout and I've been able to stay out of it. But sitting in between those two things was shame. The shame
Mm.
of not living up to standards can cause us to overwork. And then if we do get into burnout, as I did when I had to admit that I had to step away, when I had to admit that I had to leave the job and change careers, there was this other shame of I can't handle it. And I could have sat in that for a long time and I could have gone back over and over again into the burnout factory. For me, it was a burnout factory, that kind of work.
Mhm.
And instead, what I realized was when I started to share that in safe spaces, when I started to share like what was true for me and what I was actually experiencing, how it made me feel, what I felt loss around and what I was grieving, that shame dissipated. And I
Mhm.
created these deep bonds with people who heard my story, who wanted to support me, who were excited about the things that I was wanting to bring into the world. And I started to realize that without intending to, I had created all of these intimate connections across every area of my life. And I want to
Mm.
take a second there to unpack what is like the number one reaction I get when I talk about intimacy is like, well, isn't that about the bedroom? Isn't that
Right.
sexual romantic relationships? Yes, it is. And it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
I have intimate relationships with my friends. I have intimate relationships with colleagues, with my kids, with my romantic
Mhm.
partner. I can practice intimacy in innumerable ways that are appropriate to different relationships. And when I do that, what I'm really doing is I'm showing up as myself, for another person, so that we can be honest and real with each other. And all of my needs can get met. I can
Yes.
deal with my fears, I can celebrate, I can all of it. And so expansive intimacy became this phrase that I realized captured how I made this dramatic shift from stuck, burned out, depressed to really alive, enjoy so many rich relationships, the work that I do, all of it.
Wow. Oh my gosh, there were so many good things that you said there, and just revelations of really hearing from your side of what men are kind of going through is is very, very profound and interesting. And again, so many good things. Safe spaces is one word that you used.
Yeah.
And I would agree, like healing, I have found healing does come from those safe spaces where you can open up and share. But I feel like from a man's perspective, now that I can see what you were coming from, it's still even hard, even if you're given a safe space, to be vulnerable and open and share those deeper conversations outside of, oh, this is what we did last weekend, and this is what this is what I, how the game went last weekend, or this is what I am doing at work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's very surface level
Yeah.
communication.
Headline news relationships, I like to call them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is when you can find the circle of influence, those peers, those friends, where you can be real and honest and open, that I think you can find so much growth and healing, transformation, like just to be heard. I think so many people just want to be heard and feel
Yeah. We all
validated
do.
in some way.
Yeah. I had a guest on my podcast recently who summed it up really well. She said that vulnerability without trust creates trauma. And so if I share vulnerably with another guy who's not ready to be in the space with me where I'm talking about fears that I have, I might get piled on. I might get
Mm-hmm.
shamed. And there's now going to be a trauma experience for me where I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that again. I'm going to close down. And
Yeah.
so we need that trusting space in order to be able to say, okay, I'm going to reveal a little something here. Brene Brown has a famous expression that not everybody has the right to hear our story. So when we are ready and we know we've got something bubbling up inside us that needs to get out, I think one of the things that is helpful is to start to look around and identify who are the people who love me no matter what, who I can really trust. And maybe it's a cousin or a friend or a coworker, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your
Mm-hmm.
dog.
Yeah.
uh, just being able to give voice to it in a place where you know it's not going to bounce back at you and be used against you. It's
Mm-hmm.
so healing. And I know that, like, even just saying that, I'm like, yeah, guys don't want to talk about what's healing for them. I think it tends to be like, oh, I don't need any healing.
Right.
I got it, no problem. And sorry, we all do. Like, and if we deny it, we just kind of perpetuate the suffering. If
Mm-hmm.
instead we can find those safe spaces, we can start to say, all right, what needs our attention? How can we, find places where we feel better?
Yeah. And so in your journey, where did you find that for you? Was
Mm,
there a friend, a coach, for
yeah.
somebody that's listening that can resonate with that, and they're thinking, I don't know. I don't know if I think about my circle and I think about my family, they're very judgmental, or I came from a very, we must not show emotion. We must be achievers. We must be big and bold and do and be more. For somebody like that that's listening, how do they even start to
Yeah, there
open
are a
up in a
lot of
safe space?
there are innumerable ways. I'll give a couple that have been incredibly valuable for me. I was raised in a dysfunctional family that had addiction in it, alcoholism, and there was a lot of keeping things quiet and not saying what was real. And eventually, about 12 years ago, maybe, I learned about the Al-Anon program. A friend of mine mentioned, like, there's this group that meets for friends and family members of alcoholics. And I
Mhm.
started going to those meetings and being able to hear people share without anybody judging, and being incredibly honest. I was stunned at how, like, what these people were saying in front of a group of strangers. And I eventually started to participate in a way that I could share and I could just say things out loud in a room that was incredibly safe. And I eventually found a mentor in that program, a sponsor, a man who is a dear, dear friend of mine who I could have deep personal connection with and really talk about life and what was troubling me and what I wanted. So
Yeah.
that was one place. Um, The next one is a little bit unusual, perhaps for some people. Um, I decided to take an improv comedy workshop 8 years ago, and I fell in love. I got the exact same experience walking into that room as I got walking into Ellen. I'm like, oh, here are my people.
Yeah.
And through classes over many years, and I now perform regularly, I've developed this community of friends who love to explore life the same way that I do. And it was a way that I could find my tribe. And I've got another friend who's found his tribe through this intergenerational mountain biking club.
Mm,
It's about connecting. And for guys, oftentimes, it's kind of a predominant rule, we find our social connection in activities shoulder to shoulder instead of face to face.
mm-hmm,
And so I think,
mm-hmm.
for any men who might be listening to the episode, what's a thing that you love to do? And then go find a group that's doing it, whether that's a group of 2 people or 20 people, doesn't matter. You start to then grow this comfort level, and you can then find, like, okay, over the course of conversations, yeah, I didn't blurt to people right away, like, hey, I'm freaking out because I got divorced and my career is going sideways. I found
Yeah.
ways to start sharing small bits, testing out that trust, and then building it to the point where I could have any conversation with those people and have it be safe. And
Yeah.
that process has just been, so it's such a huge relief. But like this huge ton of bricks came off my shoulders of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I don't have to hold this inside. I get to talk about it to people who get me and who aren't going to judge me.
Yeah. No, those are great. Those are great recommendations. And finding what you love to do. I mean, honestly, for the people that are burned out, they're probably struggling to figure out what that is because they've
Yeah.
invested so much time in either their work or parenting or all the things that we have to do. But I think that's a great recommendation is think about what do you really love to do and spend some time sitting in that.
Mhm.
And then where can you find other people like that
And
love
I'll
what you
say that
love?
that question was so hard for me, just as you reflected, is that when I started to ask myself that question, I hadn't asked it in decades.
Oh yeah.
And so working with a coach was actually one of the other resources that was super helpful for me, because it gave me somebody who was skilled at asking me
Mhm.
questions in a variety of ways to help me start to get to the real answers.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And so you found comedy.
I did.
So
Yeah.
you said improv comedian. So
Yeah.
is that something that you actually do as well?
Oh yeah, I've got a show next Saturday. I perform
Really?
once a month. I'm up on stage with my 5 teammates, and we make it up as it goes. And we're out there without a net, and it's so fun. It's so creative. It's so connected. I've learned so much about social
Oh, I bet.
emotional expression in being in those made up scenes, and it's also a spiritual experience. I have I note in the book, I think a couple of times, there's all these different types of intimacy. There's physical intimacy and sexual intimacy, which we're all familiar with, but there's emotional intimacy, and there's intellectual and experiential, and there's also spiritual intimacy. And I describe as one of my examples of spiritual intimacy these shows at the comedy theater where I perform, because there's 60 odd people in the audience, plus the
Yeah.
performers and the staff. We're all coming together to this one place with the same goal in mind, which is to laugh.
Hmm.
And I can't think of anything that lifts the spirits higher than laughter. So to me, it's a spiritual intimacy experience.
Yeah.
And among other things, it's a blast, and keeps me excited and connected, and it's just fun.
It's fun. I love that. I am all about laughter and fun. That's fun is on my top 5 core values because I'm like, what's the point of living if
Same.
we're not having fun in life and laughing every day? And I think there's some crazy study too about how often children laugh versus adults, and
Yeah.
it's crazy the difference.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
not even 10x. It's more than that. It's like,
yeah,
wait a minute, why are we so serious? Why are we
yeah,
taking ourselves so seriously? Like, can we enjoy life
yeah.
in every little moment? That's what my I have them ordered. I can't remember if it's number 2 or number 3. I think it's number 2. Create as much fun as possible is on my
Hmm.
values list.
Yeah. Oh, it's so important. And I'm curious, because you're finding that in your adulthood, but if you think back to your childhood,
Hmm.
was there something there about being, either a jokester when you were younger, or uh maybe class clown in the yearbook, or fun, the funny zone was in your nature or wheelhouse?
I remember asking my Al-Anon sponsor one time to help me understand what recovery meant, because that's a big word in that
Yeah.
community. And he said, it could just mean getting something back that you used to have. And for me, humor and comedy as a regular part of my life is absolutely something that I recovered from my childhood.
Okay. Wow. That's powerful.
Mm.
Yeah. I was curious about that when you were sharing that that's something that you found and it's bringing you so much joy now.
Oh, I'm a
So,
goofball through and through. It's it's one of my favorite parts of me.
oh, I love it. I love it. Um, so you're now a coach. You are the founder of the Centered Coach, which I love the name of that, because it really ties into what you were just saying earlier in the podcast about how you really are just a more calming, I forget the word that you said earlier, but you're that kind of person, but through society and the way that you felt, you had to be a different person. So I love that you really put that, because when I think of centered, I really think of just grounded
Mhm.
and purposeful. I don't know if that's your intent of it, but
Yeah,
that's
well, it came from that exercise I described where I saw myself in my best version of what I could do for the world was to be help people find the calm centered place
yeah.
from which they did their best at work. And that's literally where the name of the company came from, was that exercise where I allowed myself to just imagine what would be the best version of the work that I could do.
Oh, I love that. Very cool. Very cool. So you offer this through your story, you founded this coaching. Like you said, you're like, what? I can get paid to do this, like, as a job, and you love it. Um, so as we were talking about people who are finding, that or feeling like they want to open up, but don't know the place. You mentioned some great ones, Al-Anon, finding a mentor, finding something that you love to do and getting around people that are like-minded.
Mhm.
But you as well would be a great resource, for men, it sounds like, that may need to open up. So would you mind just sharing a little bit about your work in that coaching space, and how you help your clients?
Yeah, it may not be a surprise that I like to work with leaders, having
Hmm.
lived that life, dads, because parenting is such an important part
Yeah.
of my life. And how do we balance those two really important aspects of manhood? And how do we also access the fun in our lives? So I've alternately described myself as a leadership coach, an executive coach, a business coach, a midlife coach. I really want to help men who are in these leadership roles, especially because they can have a huge downstream effect on the people that they lead. If they own a business, especially, that they're opening up their world to
Mhm.
possibilities of how can I have a healthier, happier experience. So a lot of the one-on-one coaching I do is with executives and business owners. I also do leadership development in organizations, usually smaller organizations, 20 to $50 million a year companies,
Yeah.
where I can come in and make a big impact, help them build a much more robust leadership group that can support each other.
Mhm.
And I do some workshops and facilitation in in a variety of different ways. I bring improv skills into some of those to bring fun into the learning,
Fun.
because that's when we actually learn at our best. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the gist of what I do generally.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, you're definitely making an impact, and I'm excited for anybody listening that's been looking for, a coach that they can relate to. I think you would be a great fit for them. Um, One of my other core values is growth. I love to grow and learn.
Yeah.
So I love to end the podcast with something that you are listening to, you're reading, maybe something you're watching. that would help maybe anybody else, and selfishly myself, because I want to always be learning what the new things are out there that I should be listening to. So what's something that you've found lately that's just been great?
Mhm. I am voracious, so I'm gonna drop a few things in if that's all right.
Yeah,
One of the favorite books that I've read this year is The Awakening Body by Reggie Ray. And to help get out of our heads and into our bodies through somatic meditation has been a incredibly powerful learning for me and something I've been practicing. Um, the Healing Organization or Healing Organizations by Raj Sisodia. It's a follow on to the book Conscious Capitalism, both of which I've read this year, which talk about different ways that as leaders we can be more purposeful and take care of everybody, all stakeholders in a business.
love that.
And I'm listening right now a fiction book called Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, which is just like it's a stunning story, and I think it's like 21 hours of listening on Audible, and I'm only about 8 hours into it, and it's just such a great story. So I don't allow myself enough fiction, but that book I
Right.
would highly recommend.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with you. I need to add more of that into my Audible selection as well. It's always usually leadership or self-help or, those kind of things. So that's great.
Yeah, I'm hooked on
Awesome.
those as well, but every once in a while, a little bit of fun.
Yeah, you gotta put that side of your zone in the mix too. So I agree with that. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate you being vulnerable, coming on, sharing your story. The whole purpose is that it will help somebody else that may be listening. Um, what's the best way, Jim, that they can connect with you? Where do you hang out the most?
Yeah. Easiest way to find anything about me is at my website, thecenteredcoach.com. I'm also really active on LinkedIn. If you search The Centered Coach on LinkedIn, you'll probably find me easier than if you search Jim Young, because pretty common name.
Common name. Awesome. Well, really appreciate it, Jim. Thank you so much for everything today. It was wonderful and really glad that we were able to connect.
Yeah, thanks for letting me come on and share a little bit of my story today, Jill.
All right. Thank you.